get to some local numbers now and send it over to Canberra. Joining us is the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Angus, good to see you this morning. So we've got our wages, the wage price index released later on today. If, as expected, the number comes in at 1.3% for the quarter, and these can change, it's just a prediction, but what would that say to you, that figure?
Well, I'm not going to give you a forecast, Pete. I'll leave that to the Treasurer who loves to forecast. But what I will say is that regardless of how this comes in, what we're continuing to see for Australians is a reduction in their real wages, a reduction in their standard of living. Indeed, we've learnt just in the last week that Australians' standard of living has collapsed. 5.1% in the last year, net disposable income, and that's the worst of any major advanced country in the world. This is a disastrous situation for Australian households. And meanwhile, whilst this is the talk around Australian kitchen tables, is not the talk around the cabinet table, and we're seeing a government that's been asleep at the wheel, that's been distracted and focused on other things, and it's really starting to show, Pete. And real wages going backwards, collapses in disposable income, collapse in labour productivity. These are disastrous outcomes. We're at the back of the pack internationally. This is coming from Canberra. This is Australia specific. It's worse here than almost any other advanced country in the world. And we need a government that gets onto the job.
But still got that AAA credit rating.
Oh, well, wonderful. But you know what? Australians don't have a AAA credit rating in their household situations. They're really struggling. And this is the point. You've got, if you want to beat inflation, you've got to make it your first, second and third priority. We know that from past episodes of inflation around the world and over the years. And this has not been the government's first priority. It hasn't been the Treasurer or the Prime Minister's first priority. We've got a Prime Minister who's interested in everything else. He doesn't like talking about it. He doesn't like focusing on it.
OK, well, on the Prime Minister, because he suggested yesterday that Australians shouldn't expect any more cost of living relief, despite, your claim there, which in real terms, wages going backwards, that sounds accurate. Other than limited targeted measures, though, that's according to the Prime Minister, some of which have already been implemented. So is that the right approach, though, while debt and debt repayments are so high at the moment?
Well, the right approach is to put downward pressure on inflation and interest rates. That's the right approach. And here's the point.
So no more handouts.
You can give a handout too. Well, but the point is that if you want to beat this, you've got to get inflation down. I mean, and this is a government that simply doesn't understand.
So how should they do that?
This is coming from their actions. Well, we've said time and time again, you've got to pull every lever available. Industrial relations policy. We've got a government that is actually getting in there and taking out institutions like the ABCC and the Registered Organisations Commission, which was focused on ensuring that we had a competitive construction sector with downward pressure on prices in the construction sector. We've got a government that is seeking to get rid of flexible arrangements between employers and employees. I mean, these are exactly the wrong industrial relations policies at a time like this. We've got a government that thinks competition policy is simply looking after your mates. It's crony capitalism. Well, that's not how you beat inflation. We've got fiscal policy where, frankly, the government has added $188 billion of spending since it came into power.
OK, so
this is not the way you beat
What about
inflation.
migration? What, you think it's too high? Migration too high? You're with Peter Costello yesterday. You weighed into the debate?
Yeah, the point I've made all the way along on this is if you're going to have an additional 1.5 million migrants over the coming years, which is what Labor has laid out itself in its budget papers, and we're actually running at higher rates than that right now, you've got to make sure that you've got sufficient housing and infrastructure and so on to support that. And we've got a government that said, well, look, what we're going to do now is we're going to cut back on infrastructure spending. Now, that's the one piece of spending that in those sort of circumstances you want to make sure is productive and is maintained. So this is a government that simply is not on top of the task, and you can't have this kind of rate of population growth whilst you also have, at the same time, policies that are inflationary, where we've got infrastructure being cut back, where housing is clearly not keeping up. And Australians understand this. I mean, they don't need to see the data on this. They know this is a real problem.
We're out of time. We had a question about AEMO, but I'll have to let that pass. Angus, appreciate your time, though. We'll talk to you again soon.